HOA for disrupting the peace. She sneered at the thought that anyone could challenge her authority. What she didn't know was that Jason wasn't intimidated. He'd been documenting her behavior for months, ready to turn the tables. He called in his lawyer, and that's when Karen realized she'd made a dangerous enemy. But the real shock was still to come. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in the small suburban neighborhood where Jason Turner and his family had settled years ago. The sun was shining through the leafy branches of the trees that lined the quiet street, casting dappled shadows on the sidewalks. The smell of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air, and the sound of children playing could be heard in the distance. Jason, a 35-year-old father, had just finished mowing the lawn in front of his modest two-story house. His shirt was stained with sweat, his brown hair slightly tousled from the heat, but he couldn't help but smile at the sight of his two kids, Lucy, age 8, and Ben, age 6, running around the yard with a soccer ball. Jason was a family man through and through. His eyes were warm and brown, and though his build was solid and athletic, there was a kindness to his demeanor that made him approachable. Today, like every other Saturday, he had plans to enjoy a quiet afternoon with his family. His wife Emily was inside making lunch, and Jason was looking forward to spending time with his kids before the weekend chores piled up. "Kick it, Ben! Pass it to me!" Lucy shouted, laughing as she kicked the ball toward her brother, who eagerly kicked it back. Jason chuckled as he watched them play, the joy on their faces unmistakable. But then, out of nowhere, a sharp, authoritative voice interrupted the peaceful moment. "Jason Turner!" Karen Walters' voice cut through the air, drawing Jason's attention. Standing at the edge of the driveway was Karen, the self-proclaimed neighborhood enforcer. She was in her mid-40s, with platinum blonde hair neatly pulled back into a tight bun, and her pale skin looked almost flawless under the sun. Her outfit, an immaculate white blouse and pencil skirt, seemed out of place for a Saturday afternoon. Karen's posture was stiff, and her eyes were narrowed in a way that immediately signaled trouble. Jason's heart sank. He'd known this day might come. Karen had always been a stickler for the rules, and his kids playing outside on the weekend had clearly crossed a line in her mind. "Hey, Karen," Jason said, trying to keep his tone calm despite the tension rising in his chest. "What's going on?" "You know exactly what's going on, Jason," Karen replied, her tone biting. "I've had complaints. Your children are causing a disturbance with all their noise." Jason blinked, taken aback. "They're just playing soccer in our own yard," he said, gesturing to the kids, who were still laughing and kicking the ball around. "How is that a problem?" "Your children's behavior is unacceptable," Karen snapped, her eyes flicking to the kids with disdain. "This is a residential area, not a playground. The noise is disturbing the peace." Jason could feel the anger beginning to bubble up inside him. His kids weren't doing anything wrong, just having fun like any other children. But Karen, as always, was on a crusade to impose her own version of order on everyone around her. "Karen," Jason said, his voice firm. "They're just kids. They're not doing anything wrong." Karen took a step forward, crossing her arms over her chest. "I'm going to take this to the HOA," she said, her voice dripping with authority. "If you don't make them stop, I'll report it. You don't want to get on the HOA's bad side." Jason's fists clenched at his sides. The HOA had always been a source of tension in the neighborhood, and he knew exactly how Karen could manipulate her position within it. She used her influence to impose petty rules and complaints on everyone else, as if she were the ultimate authority. "I'll make them stop when I see something that's actually a problem," Jason said, his voice tightening. "But you can't control my kids or tell us where they can play." Karen's lips curled into a smug smile. "Oh, I can, and I will," she said, turning on her heel. "I'll make sure the HOA gets involved. Your children's noisy behavior is unacceptable, Jason. You'll see." With that, She walked away, her steps deliberate and self-assured, leaving Jason standing there, seething. His kids had barely noticed the interaction, still happily kicking the ball back and forth. Jason stood there for a moment, staring after her. His thoughts raced. This wasn't just about noise. This was about control, and Karen was always trying to impose her rules on the entire neighborhood. He couldn't stand to see his kids be treated like they were doing something wrong when all they were doing was playing in their own yard. He turned to Lucy and Ben, both of whom were still oblivious to what had just happened. He forced a smile. "All right, you two, let's finish the game, okay?" But inside, he was already making plans. Karen had crossed a line, and Jason wasn't about to let her get away with it. He would find a way to fight back, and he wasn't going to let her control his family or his neighborhood. The following week, a formal letter arrived in Jason's mailbox. The HOA, under Karen's leadership, had issued a warning for excessive noise, claiming that Jason's kids had been causing disturbances to the neighborhood. It was absurd. His kids weren't doing anything but playing, but the HOA was powerful, and he knew this wasn't going to be an easy fight. Frustrated but determined, Jason went to the HOA office, a small brick building in the center of the neighborhood. Inside, it was sterile and quiet, with rows of neatly organized paperwork behind a counter. Karen sat at the desk, looking as smug as ever, her hands folded in front of her. "You're the one causing trouble now, Jason?" Karen asked, not even bothering to hide her disdain. "I'm causing trouble?" Jason snapped, holding up the letter. "This is ridiculous. My kids are just playing. You can't seriously believe this is an issue." Karen's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward. "I'm just following the rules, Jason. The community needs to be peaceful. Your kids are disturbing that peace." Jason clenched his fists, trying to control his anger. "This is my property, Karen. I don't need you or anyone else telling me how to raise my kids or live my life." "You've gone too far this time." Karen didn't budge. "If you don't want this to escalate, you'll start controlling your kids, or the HOA will step in further. This is your last warning." Jason could feel his patience wearing thin. "You're not going to win this, Karen. I'll fight you on this." Jason wasn't one to back down, especially when it came to his kids. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that Karen wasn't just making an issue out of nothing. She was trying to control everyone around her, and he wasn't going to let her get away with it. He started speaking with his neighbors, making them aware of Karen's tactics. It wasn't long before other families started sharing their frustrations with Karen. Jim, an older man who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, was the first to step forward. "I've seen Karen do this before," he said. "She's always trying to control everyone. It's time we do something about it." Claire, another neighbor, added, "I've heard her complain about kids playing, and now she's going after Jason's family. We can't let her get away with this." Jason felt a surge of hope. For the first time, it wasn't just him against Karen. It was the whole neighborhood. Together, they decided to take action. They organized a meeting and drafted a petition to the HOA, demanding that Karen stop trying to impose her will on the families. As the petition circulated, more neighbors signed, and the community rallied behind Jason. Karen's authority was being questioned, and for the first time, she seemed to lose her confident demeanor. The showdown finally came. Jason, supported by the majority of the neighborhood, stood in front of the HOA office one last time. He was no longer alone. Around him stood his neighbors, Jim, Claire, and others, who had backed him up all the way. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the scene, but the atmosphere was tense. Jason turned to Karen, his voice steady. "You've tried to control everyone, Karen, but this time you've gone too far." Karen stood across from him, visibly shaken but still trying to maintain control. "This isn't over, Jason. I will not back down." "You've already lost," Jason